There are some lies so cruel that they do more than deceive you. They quietly steal years from your life. For more than a decade, a young woman named Amelia Brooks believed there was something wrong with her face. She believed strangers would stare if they ever saw her without the mask she wore every day. She believed no man could ever look at her and see beauty. And she believed all of it because the woman she called family had made sure she did. But on one unforgettable evening, inside a mansion filled with wealthy guests, Amelia stood across the room from one of the richest men in America, while her stepsister waited for him to announce their engagement. Everyone thought they knew which woman he had come to choose. Then the billionaire rose from his chair, walked straight past the glamorous daughter who had been prepared for him, stopped in front of the quiet girl wearing the mask, and reached for her hand. What happened next would expose a family secret that had controlled Amelia's life for years. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Amelia Brooks had not always lived as though she needed permission to be seen. There had once been photographs of a laughing little girl running barefoot across the lawn of a comfortable suburban home outside Charlotte, North Carolina. In those photographs, Amelia had bright brown eyes, thick dark hair, and the carefree smile of a child who believed home was the safest place in the world. Her father, Richard Brooks, had built a successful construction business from the ground up. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't even close. But he had earned enough to give his daughter stability, education, and the promise that one day she could become whatever she wanted. Amelia's mother died when she was very young, and for several years Richard raised his daughter alone. Then he met Margaret, an elegant widow with a daughter named Vanessa who was almost the same age as Amelia. At first, Amelia thought Margaret was going to give her something she had always wanted, a mother. Margaret remembered birthdays, helped choose school clothes, attended parent meetings, and presented herself as the woman who would finally make the Brooks household complete. Vanessa became the sister Amelia had never had. The girls played together, attended the same school, and for a while there was little reason to suspect that jealousy would one day become the force controlling both of their lives. But as the girls grew older, differences between them became harder for Margaret to ignore. Vanessa was attractive, confident, socially ambitious, and deeply aware of appearances. Amelia was quieter. She didn't try very hard to impress anyone. Yet teachers remembered her. Neighbors complimented her. Friends seemed naturally drawn toward her. Margaret noticed something else as well. As Amelia entered adolescence, the resemblance to her late mother became increasingly striking, and people who had known Richard's first wife began saying the same thing whenever they visited. Amelia was becoming exceptionally beautiful. Margaret smiled whenever they said it, but she remembered every compliment. The change in the household did not happen all at once. That was what made it difficult to recognize. Psychological control often works through repeated criticism, isolation, humiliation, and efforts to weaken a person's confidence, rather than through one obvious event. Organizations that study emotional abuse describe how controlling people can gradually make another person doubt their judgment, appearance, and worth. Amelia would experience a fictionalized version of those patterns inside the place where she should have felt safest. Margaret started small. She corrected the way Amelia wore her hair. She told her certain dresses drew too much attention. She suggested that boys who spoke to her were laughing behind her back. Whenever someone complimented Amelia, Margaret later found a way to diminish it. A woman at church once told Amelia she had beautiful eyes. On the drive home, Margaret casually remarked that people often praised one feature when the rest of a person's face was unfortunate. Amelia was only 14. She remembered that sentence for years. Then came the accident that gave Margaret an opportunity. Amelia was 15 when a vehicle carrying her and several classmates was involved in a minor collision returning from a school event. Amelia suffered cuts along one side of her face. The wounds looked frightening at first, but doctors expected them to heal well. Richard was terrified when he saw his daughter, yet the medical staff reassured him. Margaret stayed beside Amelia during the early weeks of recovery and acted almost unusually attentive. She changed bandages, applied medication, and repeatedly told Amelia not to look at herself until everything had healed. Amelia obeyed. But before she could regain the confidence to examine her face properly, tragedy struck the family again. Richard suffered a massive heart attack and died unexpectedly. Amelia was 16. In the space of a few months, she had survived an accident, lost her father, and become legally dependent on the woman who had married him. After the funeral, Margaret's behavior changed. There were no dramatic announcements. There was simply less affection, fewer choices, and an increasing number of rules. Amelia's room was moved to a smaller space at the rear of the house because Margaret claimed Vanessa needed the larger bedroom for college preparation. Amelia's allowance disappeared because Margaret said Richard's business affairs had become complicated. Plans for private school were abandoned. Then one morning Margaret handed Amelia a soft fabric mask designed to cover much of her lower face. She told her the healing had not gone as well as the doctors originally hoped. According to Margaret, the scars were uneven, prominent, and likely permanent. Amelia asked to see them. Margaret told her she wasn't emotionally ready. Amelia asked whether they could return to the doctor. Margaret replied that specialists had already done everything possible. Then came the sentence that would shape Amelia's identity. Margaret told her that if she wanted people to remember who she was rather than what had happened to her face, the kindest thing she could do for herself was keep it covered. Amelia was grieving too deeply to fight. She trusted an adult who spoke with certainty. She trusted the woman who had cared for her bandages. And because she was still young, she assumed Margaret knew more than she did. The large mirror that once stood in Amelia's room disappeared during renovations. The small mirror in the bathroom was positioned high enough that Amelia usually saw only her eyes and forehead while wearing the mask. Whenever she expressed curiosity about removing it, Margaret reacted with concern rather than anger. She would tell Amelia she was protecting her from cruel people. That approach was more effective than force because it made control feel like care. Research into psychological maltreatment has found that coercive control, severe insults, degradation, and isolation can seriously damage self-esteem and emotional well-being, especially when they come from caregivers. Amelia slowly stopped asking whether Margaret was telling the truth. She started asking herself how she could become less noticeable. Vanessa understood much more than Amelia realized. She had once seen Amelia without the bandages shortly after the wounds healed. Vanessa knew the scars were faint. She had also heard Margaret speaking privately to a family friend about how much Amelia resembled her beautiful mother. Vanessa never corrected the lie. At 17, she had already learned that her mother's approval came easiest when she accepted Margaret's version of the world. And Margaret's world revolved around one belief. Vanessa deserved to be first. First in attention. First in opportunity. First in marriage. First in any room where status mattered. Amelia's beauty became dangerous not because beauty itself held magical power, but because Margaret had built so much of Vanessa's identity around being admired that another young woman receiving attention felt like a threat. So Amelia remained covered. Year after year, she wore the mask long after the accident had faded into the past. By 24, Amelia's life had become remarkably small. She cooked most of the household meals. She managed grocery deliveries, answered calls when Margaret was away, organized documents for the family business, and performed dozens of tasks that had gradually become expected rather than appreciated. She had once dreamed of studying architecture. As a girl, she filled notebooks with sketches of homes, hotel interiors, staircases, and public spaces. Richard had promised to help her apply to design schools. After his death, Margaret told her tuition was impossible, and suggested that someone with Amelia's appearance would struggle in an industry built around clients and presentation. Amelia believed that too. She took a few online courses secretly and continued drawing late at night, but she never submitted an application. Meanwhile, Vanessa attended an expensive university, traveled frequently, and returned home determined to marry someone who could provide the lifestyle she believed she deserved. That was when Ethan Cole entered their lives. Ethan was 41, the founder of Cole Meridian Group, a private investment and property development company headquartered in Atlanta with projects across several American cities. Unlike the loud personalities frequently associated with enormous wealth, Ethan maintained a relatively private life. He had made his first serious money buying distressed commercial property in his 20s, then expanded into logistics centers, hotels, and mixed-use developments. By 40, financial magazines estimated his holdings in the billions. He had been photographed with politicians, athletes, and entertainers, Yet friends described him as a man who distrusted people who became too interested in him after learning what he owned. He had been engaged once in his 30s, but the relationship ended before the wedding. After that, Ethan became even more cautious about romance. Margaret knew almost none of the personal details. She knew only the number attached to his name, and to her that was enough. Margaret met Ethan through an investment dinner connected to a redevelopment project in Charlotte. She discovered that Cole Meridian was considering partnerships with several local firms, including one company still tied to Richard Brooks's former business network. Margaret immediately saw an opportunity larger than the contract itself. Vanessa was 25, beautiful, unmarried, educated, and eager for the kind of life Ethan could provide. Within weeks, Margaret managed to arrange a private dinner at the Brooks residence. She told Vanessa exactly how to dress. She hired a chef, ordered expensive wine, brought in fresh flowers, and invited a handful of people who could make the evening appear casual rather than arranged. Then she gave Amelia a simple instruction: stay upstairs until the guests leave. Amelia didn't question it. She had grown accustomed to disappearing whenever Margaret wanted the house to look perfect. But less than an hour before dinner, one of the servers called to say he was sick. Margaret panicked. She could not manage the event shorthanded. Eventually she went upstairs and told Amelia she would have to assist, but warned her not to involve herself in conversation. Amelia changed into a plain black dress, secured the familiar mask over her face, tied her hair back, and entered the dining room carrying a tray. Ethan noticed her almost immediately. It wasn't because he could see enough of her face to determine whether she was beautiful. He noticed something else. Vanessa never said thank you when Amelia refilled her glass. Margaret corrected Amelia sharply when a spoon was placed on the wrong side of a plate. Another guest asked Amelia whether she worked for a catering company, and before Amelia could respond, Margaret simply said she was helping the family. The answer was technically true, yet the tone suggested Amelia occupied some undefined position between relative and servant. Ethan watched the exchange without commenting. Later that evening, he stepped into the kitchen looking for sparkling water, and found Amelia standing over a counter drawing something on the back of an envelope. When she saw him, she quickly turned the paper over. Ethan apologized for startling her, and asked what she had been drawing. Amelia said it was nothing. He smiled and told her that people rarely hide nothing that quickly. Embarrassed, she showed him the sketch. It was a redesign of the dining room they had just eaten in. Amelia had imagined widening the entryway, changing the lighting, and moving one wall to create a better relationship between the dining area and garden. Ethan stared at it longer than Amelia expected. Property development had taught him to recognize the difference between random decoration and spatial understanding. He asked whether she was an architect. Amelia laughed softly and said no. She had only wanted to become one once. Ethan asked what stopped her. Before she could answer, Margaret appeared at the kitchen entrance. Margaret's smile arrived too quickly. She told Ethan everyone was waiting in the living room, and then turned toward Amelia with an expression that changed the moment he walked away. That night, after the last guest departed, Margaret confronted Amelia. She accused her of deliberately trying to attract Ethan's attention. Amelia was stunned. Their conversation had lasted perhaps 3 minutes. Margaret reminded her that Vanessa was interested in him, and told Amelia there were boundaries respectable women understood. Then she reached for the most reliable weapon she had used for years. She told Amelia not to misinterpret kindness from a man like Ethan. He had probably spoken to her because he felt sorry for her. Amelia went to bed embarrassed, replaying every word she had said and wondering whether Margaret was right. That was how thoroughly the lie had taken hold. Amelia did not consider the possibility that Ethan might have genuinely enjoyed speaking with her. She considered only whether she had humiliated herself by believing she deserved his attention. Ethan returned 5 days later. Margaret had invited him to review several documents related to the proposed investment. Vanessa happened to be home. She appeared in an elegant cream dress and spent much of the afternoon beside him. Yet halfway through the meeting, Ethan excused himself and found Amelia in the garden trimming dead leaves from a row of hydrangeas. He asked whether she had redesigned any other room since their last conversation. Amelia smiled despite herself. She told him she had redesigned the entire house many times, though only on paper. That began a conversation lasting nearly 20 minutes. They discussed buildings, old neighborhoods, why some rooms felt welcoming and others felt cold, and why Ethan preferred restoring historic properties rather than demolishing them. Amelia forgot to be self-conscious. For those 20 minutes, the mask became almost irrelevant. Ethan couldn't see all of her expressions, but he could hear enthusiasm returning to her voice whenever she discussed something she loved.